Guys, welcome back to Mobile London. Good to see obviously a good number of people sort of RSVP for this and join the call. It's obviously our first one of 2021, so it's great to kick that off again and start to get the meetups more regular. Today I'm here obviously with Teresa Wu, Head of Engineering Android at Tide, who's going to be speaking about an interesting topic at the moment, which is obviously Flutter. Speaking to people at the moment, a lot more people are learning Flutter, taking Flutter up. So I thought it'd be good to get Teresa back on. I know she did a talk last year, and to talk about Flutter from her side. But Teresa, thanks again for taking the time out, and I'll pass this over to you. Let me just sort of make you host so you can share your screen. It should be all done now, Teresa.
You know what? My computer is frozen. Give me a second. Sorry for that. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
What I forgot to mention as well, guys, what we'll do is we'll do a chat box at the end like normal. If anyone has any questions, we'll hold it till the end of the talk. And then obviously we can ask Teresa using the chat box at the end, sort of have a little Q&A. It just makes things easier than asking questions during the talk. That can always obviously slow things down. How's your computer looking, Teresa? Oh, there we go. Perfect.
Is everything looking right? Sorry for the delay. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. Thank you for joining the chat today. And thank you for telling me to host by Mobile London. My name is Teresa. I'm head of Android engineering at Tide. In the past few months, I've been working on the next gen of the mobile app to enter the global market. Recently, we have launched an alpha version of the app to Indian market, and it's run by Flutter. We made it with a small group of engineers to support Tide's mission of the global platform. Tide is a UK leading digital financial platform. We support business owners from setting up their business. For example, our user can raise, send, automatically chase invoices, as well as being notified when they are paid. So it's super cool. You can try it if you like. Today, I'm going to demo BDD in a Flutter project. I have to say that I didn't actually believe in Flutter in the beginning. I didn't believe in BDD, not Flutter, sorry. I thought the BDD is just another testing tool. Luckily, my company decided to explore it. We had 3 days of workshop with a BDD expert back in February 2020. The entire dev team was really excited about it. We learned BDD together, and we created a plan of how we can adapt to it with our team. But then a few weeks later, we went into lockdown. So anyhow, we still managed to adapt BDD, starting being imperfect, and we slowly learning it through team collaborations. Before we go into discussions, right? Let me know if those scenarios sounds familiar to you. So when a PO requires to validate email address, a typical case can be Android engineers allows special character of a plus, but iOS consider it as invalid address. So the code passes unit test and went into production. A few months later, the user complained that they can't log in to their account on the iOS mobile after registering from Android tablet. So I don't know if you had similar experience before. Another case, when an engineer wasn't sure about if he or she should allow special character in username, the engineer asked the question to the PO. Unfortunately, the PO is engaged in a half-day product meeting, so he can't respond quickly. So the engineer, after waiting for 2 hours, he decided to take a guess and take a risk, but he also noted to himself to make this change later. But one thing after another, they both forgot about it. So the code went to production. Another case, the QA found the bug and created bug tickets. The PO suggests that this isn't a bug, but an incomplete feature. And the engineers argues that he wasn't even aware of it. So again, if this is something that a developer have to deal with, right? When a bug isn't a bug, but it's actually a lost detail, which was never discussed. So if you have experienced some of the situations before, it's the time to think about BDD. So what is a BDD? It stands for Behaviour Driven Development. It's a tool to engage people to work together, sharing common language like pure English. It started as a tool to help people understand how to do test-driven development better. Later on, it was adopted by Agile. That's why it's called it's a part of Agile process now. Although BDD concerns about testing behaviors, but fundamentally it's a process. It's not a testing tool. So in short, you can practice BDD without testing code, but you can't, or you are actually practicing BDD if you skip the process to just testing the code. So let me ask a question, right? And feel free to use emojis or actually show me your face if you prefer, right? Or show me your hand, or keep it answer with you. So how many people do you think should be involved in a BDD process? And yeah, think about your answer, or you can show me on the screen, right? How many people should be involved in a BDD process? And it's very safe to say that if your project is testable, it means somehow your code is clean. So you code once, but you think twice. If someone might ask, right, why do I want to test my function of 1 + 1? I know the result is always 2. Well, as of today, yes. But what if someone wants to refactor or make changes? How do we know that his change won't impact my function? So only running tests give us the confidence to change the code. And this is where BDD and the TDD connects. You start with BDD process, but in the end, the actual acceptance tests are carried out with TDD manner. So you will find out why in the next few slides. So if you are working in a company with cross-functional teams, introducing BDD is actually very simple. You can pick 1 or 2 small teams to spearhead the first BDD projects and gradually roll out everywhere. This is what we did at Tide. And luckily, because I'm working on a greenfield project with new tech stack, we introduced BDD in the beginning of the project. And what you see here is a very simple Gherkin syntax. Gherkin is a syntax, or you can say it's a language. Given the mission is to get things done right and to reduce creating tech debt for the future self. When working with a new project, then we used BDD. Given are the presetting you need for your tests. Usually, given contains all the happy paths and unhappy paths. For example, if you are creating a function of making a payment, you can use a given to set up success payment, error payment, and many other conditions, where here our condition are to get things done right and to reduce possible tech debt for the future. So when the keyword when is the trigger of the action. So it specifies a case and bring up the outcome of the then condition in the end. So this is a first glance of how BDD looks like in Flutter, but we will go through an actual example later. So here are the 4 steps of what the BDD process look like. So the actual BDD isn't very different from your Agile process, right? It doesn't really add any extra time as well. First, we start from story mapping and discovery. The PO creates stories in backlog, adding user acceptance criteria, followed by example mappings with 3 amigos: PO, developer, and QA. And we will discuss each step in the next few slides, but we will focus most on example mapping. And remember, those are the 4 steps in BDD process. Now, can you try again? My question, how many people do you need in BDD? Right, 3 amigos, 3, yes, correct. So if you're doing BDD by yourself, just writing tests, you're not actually doing BDD. You're not actually doing the full set of BDD. So BDD is a process, right? Discovery sits at the core. During discovery, the team and the PO discuss together the story. And during the process, if you notice your refinement has been extended a bit longer, that means maybe you're doing BDD right. In a typical project, PO creates stories and explain to engineers, right? And the QA will estimate testing separately. In a BDD project, the PO creates story and the detail of the story is discussed in refinement session through example mappings. This is what we call basically example mappings, right? So in the end, the tester and developer will write test cases together. So the step 2, backlog. When the developer are working in sprint N, the product owners are creating sprint N+1 stories in the backlog. At this point, the stories are filled with scope of the feature, and they will be converted into BDD scenarios in the example mapping session. This is an example of a ticket in the backlog. The story is to describe from a user's point of view and to create a user profile with criteria like login and validations. So as you see, right, this might be what look like in an Jira board. If you're using Jira, maybe this looks familiar for you. So if we are doing BDD, one of our tickets, right, of a story can go up to 300 lines of description. And this one is empty, right? But I'm just showing you how the layout of the tickets look like. Typically, the story before refinement should contain information about the scope of the tickets, description, a design link, if there is one, a detailed user acceptance criteria. So now, when you have this ticket, right, once you have the story in backlog, we can do the next step, which is example mapping. And we're going to refine the story. So in example mapping, product owner decides what goes into the sprint, while testers bring in the edge cases and developers add more details. And thanks to the invention of Post-it notes, this meeting is actually immersively colorful. In a real example mapping session, the board usually look like this. The PO copies the story and the rules into a board. At this stage, there's no examples for each rule, and we know nothing about it. The story is to create user profile with three fields, right? Email, address, and name. The rule 1 is to validate email address. 2 is to validate postcode, should be a UK postcode. 3 is that the name must contain minimum 6 characters. 4 is to create a profile if all 3 fields are valid. The outcome of the example mapping is to fill up each rule with example. And let's see how it's done. I'm actually going to pause a bit Now question, do you want me to continue giving you the answer of how the example mapping is done? Or do you want to actually go through the real example mapping here? What would you prefer?
We can try the mapping here, but I guess that it needs to be a vote. I'm up to the mapping here. It sounds interesting, even though I may not know how to do.
We can give it a try, right? Let's try it with a few examples, and if you think it's a bit overkill, we can go back to give you the actual example. I'm going to share my screen again. For people who just joined, we're going to do our actual example mapping now. So remember, we are saying the PO will copy stories in a board, right? And you can use any board, right? Google Doc, a white paper. And if you're in office today, you can use actually the Post-it notes. So any format is fine. But the color is actually meaningful. Yellow means it's a story. Blue is a rule. And green is example. Red is question. So when you start the example mapping, you will see the board with stories and the rules should be all here. Now we can work on the rules one by one. So try to give me an example of email.
Johnny@gmail.com.
Yeah. Well, I can't type here. Email, gmail.com, right? So this is actually a valid rule or invalid?
I would guess valid.
So you can actually make a note, right? Right. So this example is valid because you're going to use this as input for your tests later on. Can you now give me a invalid rule?
Bethany, outlook.com without that.
With the at. So let's say something like this, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, it's invalid. And you can also put a note on the side saying why it's invalid. Yeah, this is actually what we do in example mappings, and you can continue. So yeah, thank you. I'm going to share my slides again, if I find it. Sorry for the delay. Sure. Cool. So we did like a test of how example mapping should be run, and you can continue with it. And this one will go up to 2 hours for each story, if the story is actually complicated. So this is actually what the example look like for email. And in the example mapping, we work on the rules one by one. So let's say rule 1 is to validate email address. So given the rule that we must validate email address when creating a user profile, example can really go up to like even 100 or even more. So very importantly, you only allow to give examples for the rule and avoid creating rules for rules. So for example, you are not supposed to create examples for like email address should not contain white space. This is a rule, not an actual example. You need to provide both valid and invalid examples, and those examples will turn into the given data for your tests later on. So the email validation is a great example because there are thousands of invalid rules. And in the end, you might need to split this rule into another story, or maybe you will decide to use a library instead. And of course, during the example mapping process, there will be various questions, right? The PO need to help you to clarify the answer for them. And for things that the PO can't answer during the example mapping, the question will be noted down in the red notes on the side. And this is actually a more complete version of the story. although it's not even completed yet. So as you continue, your board will be full of examples and questions. So story has multiple rules, but if you have too many of it, it indicates the story is too big and it should be sliced into multiple stories. A rule summarizes a bunch of examples, and an endless list of examples maybe means that the rule is overcomplicated. Question leads us into deeper conversation. Showing too many red cards means the story is not ready. So running this example mapping really help us to identify gaps in the story, because there are multiple ways to interpret creating user profile, right? The PO might have one way of thinking and the developers might have another. So how can you know that you are implementing the right feature without fully understand it? And this is how the file system works in a Flutter project. First, you need to enable Gherkin and the Cucumber plugin in your selected IDE. Cucumber is a tool that supports BDD. So you can write simple English with Gherkin, and we're going to talk about Gherkin next. So in your acceptance tests folder, there's usually 3 files. One to initialize the tests, which is the acceptance tests.dart in our case, and the 2 more folders with name features and the step. The feature folder contains all the feature file. And this is one with the green icon in front. This is where we list, so I have people in the waiting room. This is where we list Gherkin syntax. Step folder contains all the Dart files, which implements the specifications written in the feature files. So next, you might think, all right, what is Gherkin? Or you probably know. So Gherkin, I can't really say it's a language, but it's a language, it's a syntax. It's a set of special keywords to give structure, to give structured information or an instruction. And most lines in a Gherkin document starts with one of the keyword. And this is what the Gherkin syntax looks like in Flutter from our example. So scenario is the business rule. Remember the one in the blue card from the example mapping. So the blue sticker, right, we had in the previous session. So those 4 rules will turn into scenarios. For example, validate email address, postcode, names. This is where example mapping connects to our project in the automation testing process. This is why BDD is a process to understand the feature we need to build, because all the discovery, right, will become part of our code in the end. The next given, it's basically given some context as setup, and it's not included in the example mapping. And then you might need more than one given conditions. It's not showing the example mapping, but it's very obvious, right? Because it's when a set of data are given or passed to our application, like user give a user type something, or give you some email, right? That's where given is about. When is action, when the action being performed, like to invoke or to create. So you have only one trigger in this case. You won't have multiple of one cases. Then it asserts the expected behavior, and there might be multiple outcome as well. And this is the result of our function, where a given input is accept or failed. So we don't actually worry about how the email is valued in BDD in this case. This will be part of the unit tests. So we only care about the behavior of each action. So we have discussed a lot about BDD, right? So I'm going to show you a bit more code in Flutter or in Dart to be more precise, because BDD concerns about behavior, not UI. So in this code example, we use libraries, right? And you need to add the libraries in the YAML file. And you need to create a directory or folder at the root folder of your project. You can call it anything, but in our example, we name it acceptance tests.dart. So this has a functions to involve your tests. And then you can create a feature file, contains grouping scenarios, and you might have multiple scenarios, right? Given one, then in one feature file. So copy exact words from your feature file into the test steps. If the wording doesn't match, your test will fail. And depend on how your project is structured, we use use case, right, in our project to connect repository and presenter. So the use case is what we are testing here, because it contains actual behavior and actions. By this point, your project should be full of warnings, suggests none of the class that exist. This is where BDD and the TDD connects. So TDD is related to test first concept. Fundamentally, it's a technical tool. BDD focus more on the process to make sure we know clear what we are building, why we are building it, and how we test it. So now we just need to implement use case, the test of use case, repository, test of repository, and the data layer, and so on. Then your feature is complete. And one of the very good thing about using Jira is in the end, once you take out all the warnings, right, you can run the command to execute the tests, and you can connect it, sync it up with Jira. There is a function called living documentation plugin, and then you can share all your scenarios or your tests with your team. So let's have a recap. First, our story deliver value to end user, and it change behaviors of the domain, like create a user profile, modify a playlist, upload invoices. Domain expert, maybe you can call them PO or BA, right? They create stories in a backlog with user acceptance criteria. And then each of them will become a business rule in example mapping. Then each rule will be converted as one acceptance criteria scenario. And most importantly, BDD is not unit test and is not UI test. And when should you do BDD session? So let's say if you run bi-weekly sprint, and if your sprint starts from Wednesday, you can run BDD refinement in the following midweek. And here are some examples of tests, right? So UI tests concern about UI effect, like the margin, the size of the button, and the status of it. Unit tests focus on a piece of function, and acceptance tests verifies the product and its behavior meets specific criteria by the user. So yeah, that's the end of my talk today. It's a very brief of what BDD process is. I hope you like the talk. I also written an article about it in my Medium blog, if you like some reading. Thanks for watching.
Cool, perfect. Thanks, Teresa. Cheers for the talk. Like I said, guys, if anyone's got any questions for Teresa, feel free to ask. Obviously, I know usually we use the chat box, so if anyone's got anything, if they want to put it in there, and I'm sure Teresa will be happy to answer that for us. Yes, I'll give it a second, see if anyone has anything.
Would you mind if I just make the question without in the box? Yeah, I'm a slow typer. It is a quite interesting presentation. Thank you very much. It is useful even outside Flutter. I definitely I'm thinking from everything that you're saying. One thing that is very common, and again, it is more of a process kind of thing. But one thing that is very common is some of the rules they tend to change over time and that kind of stuff. And obviously, I think from all that you said, having that strategic kind of flow will help because if the rules change, you basically know. But it is very common to happen that you get into some weird scenarios over time. With practice, we can predict most of the things, but some of them will fall on the cracks. How do you see how that happens for you when some of the rules we change a little bit and that kind of stuff? How that goes with this very strict definition between the definition of the BDD in this test scenario? If you can comment something on that, will be interesting.
That's actually a good question. So I don't know how you do testing in your team, right? Do you do manual testing or do you do automation testing? So all the change in the rules are change requirement. Maybe backend change, right? Or maybe the UI requirement change. So those are not a change of the rules, they're new requirements. You need to actually start thinking about in the right way of it's not a bug, it's not a bug. If it's not discovered in the BDD process, it's just incomplete feature. Anything that change in the future is change requirement. So we treat them as new stories or a new feature or a new task. And then because you have tests covered your feature in the previously, you can modify it. And things you modify is always doesn't really break anything because you have tests covering it. And you can think about this as part of your automation tests. Because you run in BDD, then you can actually reduce the time you spend on manual testing.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for asking that, Teresa. Does anyone else have any questions?
I've got a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi there. Hi, Teresa. Thank you for the talk. Super interesting. I missed the first bit. I couldn't get in for the first 10 minutes, so I'm sure I missed some important scene setting there, but I won't ask you to go over that now. I wanted to ask about the implementation at the level of the steps, I think, within. Are they working through, because I know you've got widgets, etc. in Flutter. Are they poking the widgets or are they working at the model layer beneath?
You missed the most important part because
it would have been answered earlier.
Yeah, because BDD is not a UI test.
Yes.
If you look at the testing strategy as a pyramid, right, and like a triangle,
yep.
On the bottom, that's where we do unit tests. Has nothing to do with UI, but we do some integration. That's a great area. In the middle is the service tests, and that's where that's where BDD tests happens mostly. You might do some, again, there might be some integration in that part as well, but there's no UI at all. So you can actually do the whole flow of BDD, even if you don't use Flutter, but you use Dart. So it's a framework free. So if your code is clean, it's testable. In your BDD session, everything at the level of your use case should be framework free. On top of that, that's where you start implementing UI widgets and everything will come in.
So it's important that you don't end up where you've got a mix of domain logic, etc., all intertwined and mixed up with your widgets.
Exactly. Always. This is why I found the BDD very useful, because you start with BDD, then you think about how the use case is, right? And you naturally following the presentation domain data layer. So because next, once you have a use case, you think about how your domain model should look like, your entities. You start with entity, you start with domain, it knows nothing about out layer, and you go to data layer, do the data mapping, right? And in the end, once you have the BDD tests showing you green, then you can start implementing UI in the end.
And sorry, another quick follow-on from that is the role of QA in this. I'm sure there was a bit at the beginning where QA are involved very much in the specification documentation part.
Yeah.
Do you involve them also in the actual kind of implementation of the steps, or is that is that then now done as in the process of that after the requirements writing?
So tester is definitely involved in the process of BDD. They are part of the three amigos of the BDD. So testers, testers, product owner, and the developer, they have to be together in a refinement session. Now, after refinement, depends on how the companies, right? Each company have different settings. Tester normally write BDD scenarios, the feature file. Remember the given if, given when, then. They write them together with developer, maybe do a pair programming or however they do it, right? So they should actually do this file together, or maybe one coding, one review it. And next step, some company I know they actually ask the QA team to do the actual acceptance tests. But then some company have different settings, right? Maybe the engineers are the one doing the actual tests.
Yeah.
So, but the most important part is the Gherkin syntax should be basically conducted together by the QA team and the engineering team, so they actually know how to test something together.
And one last question, and then I'm done, and then I can let other people jump in, is have you been able to persuade and convince product people and the domain experts to actually take part in this consistently?
So, yes and no. Yes means you need them, right? You can't really do BDD without them. No is it's not entirely your responsibility to convince them. They should also be wanting and willing to do it.
And if they don't, is it still something you do?
You need a buy-in from the company. So the company have to invest in BDD first. Yeah. They need to give time, because doing BDD in the beginning, you probably spend the extra time for sure. It's not something you can adapt in day one. We did a workshop of BDD with BDD experts, a 3 days workshop, and the entire team, including PO, are involved in the workshop. So you definitely have to spend some money, some time, invest in the process, learn it, convince people, come buy in to do it. Otherwise, it will be really difficult. So actually getting the BDD process is harder than doing the actual tests.
Yeah, that's the trick. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Teresa.
Perfect. Thank you. Just quickly, is there anyone else who has any questions, or just give people a second to join, Teresa, and then it looks like that may be it. Yeah, nothing's been right in the chat box. Well, look, thank you, Teresa, for obviously taking the time out today to speak with the guys. Like I mentioned at the start, this has obviously been recorded as well. So you should have a link coming through on the Mobile London meetup tomorrow if you want to watch this back, or whether it's going to be on YouTube. Yeah, so it will. Yeah, apologies for that at the start, obviously getting people in at certain times. Oh, look, Teresa, we do have a question in the chat box. Oh, yeah. Oh, anyway, access to the slides. Obviously, you can watch that back. But yeah, Teresa, I think that's your presentation, isn't it?
Yeah, I probably won't be able to share the slides, but I have written everything to an article in my media blog. We can. I'll share the article with Tommy, and he can share it with everyone. So basically, the article itself is everything we go through today, without actually the live example.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. What I'll do then tomorrow, once this is all sort of taken down and obviously uploaded to YouTube, I'll put it on the meetup group, and I'll speak to yourself about your blog link, and I'll put that on as well. I think we may have obviously done that before as well, with your blog on one of the old talks. So yeah, I'll find that and just double check the link with you tomorrow. But look, thank you everyone for taking the time out today. Yeah, it was good to see a nice number, especially on the first one of 2021. Yeah, we've definitely got some talks lined up, I know, over the next couple of months. So yeah, stay in touch. But thanks a lot, Teresa, and thanks for taking the time.
One more thing before I leave. If you like the project and like to practice BDD, we are looking for Flutter engineers in London. Welcome to join the team.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys, and yeah, we'll stay in touch. But take care and have a good afternoon.